on to the 1094C. I'm anticipating this is going to be 20, maybe 25 minutes, and then the balance of the time is for you to either leave, go to lunch, do whatever you want. But I'm going to run through the forms that are on the website. If you don't want to hear me do that, I wouldn't blame you. I got a real face made for radio, probably just sick of me. But I will also answer any questions you have about unique circumstances that you call it karaoke time. I hope we'll have about 15 minutes or so for that at the end, even if we go through the forms. So we've been through the 1095s. As of at least March 2nd, 2020, right, you'll have delivered a stack of those to all of the employees who are full-time in any one month. On top of that stack, and by March 31st, you will provide the 1094C and copies of all those 1095Cs to the federal government. Think of it like a transmittal or cover type of letter that you do for your independent contractors, that you do for your W-2s. This is the here's how many you're getting, and here's some just general 30,000 foot level stuff that we, the school, are providing. Somebody said we are still on mute. You shouldn't be. You should be able to hear me. Does anybody else having trouble hearing me out there? If so, send it in. I'm going to mute and unmute real quickly. I said I took it off mute, so hopefully everybody can hear. I figured we'd have about 60 chats if people couldn't hear. But if you're, Roxanne, if you're alone, if you want to try toggling your volume, and if that doesn't work, give Sherry a call here, 402-804-8000 at our office, and hopefully she can help you out with that. But if anybody else is having trouble, let me know, because it means we may have lost you all. I hope that's not the case. So your 1094C is your cover letter on top of this stack of 1095s that you already gave the employees and you're sending to the government, that their little elves can decide if they have to do anything with them. This is how the IRS makes those employer level determinations. Transition relief is gone, so we're not talking about that anymore. Part 1 of this document, pretty straightforward, right? There's only a couple of aspects of this that I want to point out. Lines 1 through, let's see, 16, that is just the school information. That is going to include, right? Sherry, if you are listening or you can hear me, can you try to get a hold of Roxanne, please, and see if you can help her out? Okay, sorry, Roxanne, I promise I'm not trying to abandon you. We'll have the recording for you as well if we lost connection here or something, but I think everybody else can still hear, hopefully, so we'll trudge forward, and like I said, we'll make sure this is available to everybody as well. Oh, we got a question. All right, I'm going to get through this first part, and then I'll go to the questions here. So 1094C Part 1, make sure that that lines up with what's in Part 1 of the 1095C, right? Because that's where we run into problems if they don't line up. The main things from Part 1 of this form, lines 18 and 20 of the 1095C, or excuse me, the 1094C, should probably be the same unless you are a super, super large school district that is submitting more than one batch of 1095Cs. For example, I don't know how Omaha Public or Lincoln Public does it, but they may have a batch that they send in that's all their teachers, and then a batch that's all their administrators, and then a batch that's all their paras, right? That is permissible. You don't have to send in just one stack of all full-time employees. But if you do that, if you're only submitting one 1094C and one stack of 1095Cs, then lines 18 and 20 will be the same. And it must match up with the number of 1095Cs you're actually submitting. So I have had a school who had a late in the game change and decided that these 3 employees weren't supposed to get the 1095C form. They failed to make that change in the 1094C, so the federal government came in and said, hey, we're missing 3. One of those examples where before we hit submit, make sure that you've figured out how many of those you have and that those numbers in lines 18 and 20 are the same. And line 19 will be checked yes if you're submitting in one batch. So if you're not, Omaha Public submitting in multiple different sets of employee batches, you're only submitting one, you'll check yes. That says to the government, this is all the 1095s you're getting from us, right? If you're doing it differently, you'll check no, but then you have to look at the instructions. There's some other steps you have to take. Most of the schools, even larger schools that we work with, have tried to do it all in one batch just to make this part easier. 1094C Part 2, this is again where you've got line 20 that should match with line 18 if you submit it all in one batch. And line 21 is likely no for all of you because you're not part of an aggregate group, right? You're not McDonald's or Taco Bell. So you're not part of a larger overarching employer and you're just your own little subsection. You are the employer that's reporting. And again, if you're checking no in line 21, we get to ignore the 4th part of this form entirely. So we ignore the third part of the 1095-C form entirely. We ignore the fourth part of the 1094-C entirely, and we'll look at that in a second. This is a big one. This is one that more and more schools have started to check a different box from when we started. This one is the certification of eligibility for the employer. This is the one that asks, are you making qualifying coverage offers to people? And did you make a qualifying offer to at least 98% of all full-time employees? So there are only two choices here, right? B and C used to be for transition relief. Again, although I'm nostalgic about transition relief, it's gone. You only have two boxes that you can check here. You check A, qualifying offer method, as long as at least one of your 1095-Cs has a 1A offer code. For most of you out there, unless you are truly a flat salary school that has to check 1A never, any school out there has at least your teachers and administrators that are probably getting a 1A offer, right? If we're gonna pay for at least a full single for any employee, short of a weird cash and lieu situation, you're gonna have at least one of your 1095-Cs coded with 1A in line 14. If that is the case, you check box A in this line 22 of the 1094-C. Now, what's interesting is, as more and more schools have started to just sort of deal with the reality of offering affordable insurance to more of your full-time staff that are non-teachers. So I've got schools that will legitimately call me and say, Bobby, we offer a full single to anybody that works here that works at least 25 hours a week, right? So Obamacare has the average at 30. But we've got some schools that say, you know, EHA allows us to go down to, what is it, 15 or 20, I think even, and you can still offer that person insurance. We have some schools that just say, look, we're competing for good employees. We're going to offer a full single to even, you know, our part-time paras as long as they meet the EHA requirements. If that is your school, if what you're saying is, I've got a good track of who are my full-time staff, and we offer at least a full single to all those folks, we know that we have a 1A qualifying offer to them, almost certainly, right? If you have offered that 1A qualifying insurance to 98% of your full-time staff, you can check box D. For a lot of schools out there, now increasingly so, as we've sort of stabilized in this Obamacare environment, more and more schools are able to check box D. The significance of checking box D is you have to be right, right? You got to make sure that we did truly offer that affordable coverage to 98% of our full-time staff. Because we don't know exactly what affordability is, right? Because it's based on their household income. What I say is, did you offer 1A qualifying insurance to your 98% of your staff? If every one of your 1095-Cs, or at least most of them where we had full-time staff has 98, and that's 98% of your 1095-Cs have that in there, then I think you can absolutely check this box. Now, it's not a huge benefit, right? The big benefit of it is where you don't have to fill in part 3, column B, which we'll go look at here in a second when we get to part 3. But really, you can check the 98% offer method, right? Only if you offered to all full-time employees in all months of 2019. So it's a take it or leave it proposition. If you're sitting there thinking, well, gee, Bobby, I put 1E for all of my paras because we make them pay 50% of the single. That doesn't mean you're going to pay a penalty. It doesn't mean you've done anything wrong, right? It just means that you're not able to use the 98% offer method, which is okay. This is just something that if your school has decided we're offering full single to everybody, you can check it. If you can't, you didn't do anything wrong. You're not necessarily going to pay a penalty. Don't worry about it. It's just something that is one of the options to explain, because if you can check it, you should. So when might this be checked? Again, you offer at least a full single to every full-time employee. Paras, custodians, cooks, teachers, admins, everybody. Unless there are any questions about that. I think we got a couple here. I want to make sure we're not getting too stale on them. Okay, question. If I have an employee who resigned, she'll be paid in January for hours worked in December. Her and her family are going on the market insurance as of January 1, per their choice. Instead of getting EHA insurance, get one more month in January. Is that going to be a problem with this reporting next year? It could be. The answer to, we have somebody who's quitting, and this is how it always works for teachers, right? If a teacher quits at semester, they've worked 4 months of the year, right? But they probably performed half their duties, but we still have 8 months of pay and benefits that we owe them. So in other words, teachers front load the hours and we back load the pay and benefits. So if what you're saying is we had a teacher who resigned and technically that teacher is owed for half of her pay for that year, half of his pay, because they worked half the duty days, there is an argument out there from the NSEA that that teacher is also entitled to 6 months of insurance, not just 4, because I worked half my days, right? I believe the response, if you contact EHA, and I don't want to speak for them, but I believe their response is we should not be insuring people who are not employed for us. My first call, if I have that question, my first call, Celine, is to EHA. It could present reporting problems, but I think what you're going to want to figure out first is, is that person actually receiving an offer from us in January or not? Because I think it might not be so much of a legal question as it is an underwriting question. Because if EHA says they're done as of December 31st, I don't know that you can insure them beyond that, right? So that's one of the uncertainties that I have kind of in how these end of employment situations are processed, especially when contractually that person's worked half the time, but we've only given them a third of their insurance benefits, right? So I don't know if you guys have another thought on that, but that's my understanding is I believe that the insurance offer ends when they're no longer employed, because that's how all the underwriting is set up. So if they could have otherwise enrolled in January, I don't know that I would consider that to be true without talking to EHA and the Blues. Really good questions, though. But yes, Celine, put a footnote in that one, or put a star by that employee, because if there's somehow where they do get pay and benefits, like if we have an agreement with them that their resignation is effective January 31st, that means they could be an employee. So next year you could be reporting on that person, even though they were fully and effectively retired and paid out in full in January, right? Because they would have, arguably, it depends on if they're working or not and all that stuff, but it is possible that that will impact your 2020 reporting.
And on this form, you can check 2 boxes, right? You can check
Yes.
A and
Yes. Question here, in this 1094C, right, we're back to line 22. Can you check A and D? The answer is yes. And in fact, I don't think you could check D without checking A. At least I'm not, it'd be a real weird circumstance where that would be possible. Every school in ESU is probably going to check A. There are an increasing handful that weren't really worrying about D, but probably should be now, especially as, like I said, we've kind of settled into this Obamacare structure. But yes, you can check both, absolutely. Check all that apply. Okay, so moving on to part 3. This right here is the biggest reason that schools have gotten those ESRP notices. Star this, highlight it, circle it, put a big smiley face by it, right? Do something. This box right here says, this is your minimum essential coverage offer indicator. Did you offer minimum essential coverage and minimum value to at least 95% of your employees' independents? Yes, you did. Doesn't matter if it was affordable. Doesn't matter if we may owe a penalty on it. We at least offered to 95% or all but 5, if you have fewer than 100, of our full-time employees. This is the one that if you check no on accident, or if you leave it blank, the IRS assumes that it's no. This is tied to penalty A. Penalty A, right, that big penalty says, did you offer insurance to at least 95% of your full-time staff? If you check no, that's when you get the $1.3 million bill from the IRS. Now, we can clean it up, but if you think that you're checking no, or if you're leaving it blank, you're making a mistake, right? It should either be yes or no, and if it's all 12 months, most likely what 99.9% of schools and ESUs that I work with will be doing is checking yes for all 12 months. If you're doing anything other than checking yes for all 12 months, in column A, line 23, call your school lawyer, right? I'm telling you right now that there's probably some mistake there. It's just getting confusing, but this is the one where you're going to get that nasty letter from the government because of a mistake or just a mistaken understanding of what this is actually asking, and it's not your fault. It's super confusing. So let's boil it down to this. If you're checking anything other than yes for all 12 months, contact your school lawyer. Okay, so that's column A. Let's move to columns B and C here in that last part of the 1094 part 3. Column B, this is the total number of full-time employees in each month. Remember, if you checked the 98% offer method back there in line 22, if you checked box D in line 22, you don't need to do this column. That's the one main benefit of being able to check the 98% offer method. That's really it though, so don't feel bad if you didn't, right? What column B is asking you is to enter how many full-time employees did you have in each of these months. Not FTEs, how many employees under the Obamacare counting rules were actually full-time. This is employees who worked at least 130 hours in the month or who are full-time, averaging 30 hours a week during your look-back period. The number of employees that you're considering full-time through your look-back method is your floor, right? And then you've got that long-term sub, and you've got the person who maybe did a whole bunch of activity driving that month. Those weird circumstances where somebody may have hit 130 in a month even though they're not normally full-time. That's really all you're adding on to this column. You do not include employees that are in what we call that limited non-assessment period. So in August, if you had 10 teachers who resigned and you hired 10 new teachers starting in August, those 10 teachers in August are not going to count because they're in the wait period to enroll in insurance. That's one of the weird, quirky rules here. So put a star by that one, highlight that one. Those teachers where you're marking 2D in line 16 of their 1095C form are not going to count as full-time employees. That's how the government basically lines up with what Blue Cross and EHA are submitting that says these people were in our wait period for enrollment. So that's column B is all your full-time employees. Column C is the total number of employees you have. So which column is going to be bigger, column B or column C? Column C, absolutely. Because column C is going to include all of your subs for that month that weren't full-time. All your bus drivers for that month that weren't full-time, right? So you have a ton of total common law employees that are not full-time in that given month. You must track, so you do not have to look at day one of the month. For example, if your pay period is the 20th of the month, you can use the 20th of each of those months to fill out these two columns, right? It doesn't have to be the first of the month or the last of the month. You can use your payroll date, which is going to make life a lot easier for you because you're going to know there's a certain amount in your look back period, right? All your teachers and admins, unless they're part-time, are probably going to count. All your full-time paras, all your 12-month staff, they're probably going to be full-time. But using your payroll period will allow you to kind of sift through those that may or may not be full-time in that given month, but they're still employees because they're getting a paycheck from you. We're using the common law definition here. So paras are still employees in the summer. That's why they can't get unemployment insurance, right? They have that guarantee of future employment unless we tell them they're fired. So when you're looking at your total employee count, paras will probably count in the summer in both columns if using the look back method, we believe them to be full-time. Because remember, we exclude from the denominator when we're calculating their full-time status, their employment break periods. So if you have, basically, let's put it this way. If we offer insurance to anybody who's full-time and we have people who remain on insurance in the summer, chances are you're offering them insurance because on the average, they're working 30 hours, right? When we ignore their summer months where they don't work at all. So knowing who counts in column B and column C is something you should kind of think through and work through those rules as you're filling those out. But if you have an employee that subs 1 day a week that is never full-time, so they're never in column B, but they work literally every month of the school year, they could show up in column C 10 times, right? They just wouldn't show up in June and July. So you got your full-time employee count as compared to your total employee count. Knowing that the common law rules, who is an employee of ours as we answer that question on that day, right, is going to apply. So that's why, again, paras who work 0 hours in July could still be considered both a full-time employee and a total employee, even though they're not working, right? Because they keep their full-time status if we've determined that they work 30 hours on average when we do our full-time calculations. That part gets confusing. I totally understand that. If you have questions, we can come back and cover it. But that's the thing to keep in mind there is knowing who we have to count even in months they're not working as a full-time employee and as a total and as an employee when they're registering no hours, right? That's hard. What about this one? What if we have somebody who's a community member who is an assistant football coach? We know they're not going to be full-time, right? And we've hopefully cabined off and tracked their hours to know that they're not working 130 in any month. Otherwise, we got other problems like the FLSA and all that stuff. But if we have a part-time football coach, that football coach is going to count as an employee right? Probably in the months of August, September, October, November, maybe December if we have equipment checkout, maybe in July if we have a team camp. So thinking about what does that person's pay cover? When are we considering them an employee? They're probably going to go into those columns, right? Because in that they are an employee that we're paying at that time. However, an employee who works for 6 months or less, like a part-time football coach, is not an ongoing employee. They're a seasonal employee. So the other rule, and I should have put it up here, I don't think I did, is if you have a substitute that you could call any day, right? That person is probably considered an ongoing employee for purposes of filling out whether they are in column C. But if you have a part-time football coach that works 3 months and then takes 9 off and then works 3 months again, that person is only going to count as an employee in those months they're actually working, because they're a temporary or seasonal employee and their clock functionally starts over every year. I will wait for the aftermath of questions if there are any on that. I know this is my least favorite part of these forms, because it's like government. We're sending you the 1095s. Why do you care? Why are you putting us through the ropes of all this? Well, what they're doing is making sure that you're not providing too many or too few 1095Cs, right? This is just a cross check to them to make sure that you're doing this stuff the right way. But still, it's frustrating. And honestly, in my opinion, these two columns are the most confusing of all the stuff that you have to do for this reporting.
So the total employee count is not necessarily how many people you paid that month.
The total employee count is not necessarily how many people you paid that month. That's right. Because
Me too. I know I've done it wrong.
I totally understand that. I don't think the government cares if you do it that way, to be honest. I've never had them question this. But the technically correct answer is the month of July. All your teachers, all your paras, they are still common law employees. That's why they can't go get unemployment insurance.
Okay.
They have an expectation they're going to continue.
Okay.
But your seasonal employees, like your football coach, does not count as an ongoing employee because they don't work for a period of at least 6 months when they take their employment break. So it's really weird, and so it's not just who you're paying. That's what I'm saying. Leave it to the government. If they would just say, how many people did you pay in that month versus how many are PACA full time, that's easy. But because they say we have to use the common law definition in column C, that begs all these weird questions about what is a para in July? What is a sub in July? What is a football coach in July? What's a teacher in July?
What's the para that works it doesn't work, resigns in July?
Then they're not an employee.
The para that resigns in July is probably an employee through the day they resign. Yeah, it's weird, but they work no hours. I get that. But that's why our work, like I said, our unemployment rules say if you have the expectation of future employment through, which is to our advantage, absolutely. So that's why I don't want to play too fast and loose with this, because I don't want to mesh that stuff too much. Okay, question here. We're almost done with this form, I promise. Can you explain the sub-employee count one more time? Absolutely, absolutely. You probably have a sub list, right? And normally you start at the top. So you tend to have the person that you call that subs for you, maybe once a week at least, pretty regularly throughout the year. That person, you're probably going to consider an ongoing employee. In fact, some of you send out sub letters still, right? That say to that sub, hey, thank you for subbing for us. We intend to call you as a sub next year. The reason you do that is so they can't get unemployment or underemployment insurance in the summer. Same rule applies to the parents. So if you consider that sub an ongoing sub, and it's just a matter of how often we need them, it's not a matter of whether we consider them on our sub list, I would treat that person as an ongoing employee for a number of reasons, not least of which is we have an argument that if they do 3 maternity leaves in 1 year, right, we can track their hours over the course of the look back period, just like you do for regular employees. So there's a number of reasons why, but I would say any sub that you plan on subbing regularly, I would treat that person as an ongoing employee. They show up in column C even in July. If you have somebody way down on the bottom of the list that you literally never intend to call, and we can't evidence that we call them more than once every 6 months, they're probably not an ongoing employee. So it's not a hard and fast rule, right? But if I'm talking subs, anybody who's going to be a regular substitute for us, who's never going to be full-time, they're not going to show up in column B, but we generally consider them an ongoing sub for us that we're going to use regularly, I would put them in column C. And the answer isn't because the government has clear rules on this. It's because I want to be able to use that to our advantage in other contexts, like unemployment. that sort of thing.
Okay, so if you use the 98% offer method, you don't have to fill out column B.
Yes.
You still have to fill out column C.
If you use the 98% offer method, you do not have to fill out column B, but you still have to rack your brain on who is a common law employee in each of the months in column C. Huge pain. I totally get it. The amount of value that this has relative to the time that you're probably going to spend thinking on it is really small, because the government, at least not any time that I've had a school that got an ESRP or a penalty notice, they've never even looked at this. It's never even been brought up. But it does show up in that ESRP table that we talked about in those penalty letters. This information shows up in there. So they look at it. We can't just fluff it off, right? But we do know that they're not really focusing on this column B and column C overall, but we should still do it right, because it is showing up. And this is what helps them understand if there's an imbalance between, the number of 1095s we reported versus our total number of employees. That's when they may come in and do an actual audit and say, hey, you clearly can't be computing this or calculating this stuff the right way. Okay, keep questions coming, but I want to get through this part because I want to be respectful of your time here. 1094C Part 3, column D, is the aggregate group indicator. You are likely not going to use that. So don't worry about column D unless you really do think that you are going to submit in multiple batches, or if you're part of like a joint employer situation. If you're a McDonald's, sure. I don't know of any school or ESU that's going to have to worry a lot about it. If you think if this may apply to you, I would check with your school lawyer, because the rules are kind of funny. Column E, that's where we used to put our transition relief. Oh, so many relics. Totally reserved and not used at this point. We do not have to fill out Part 4. Put a big cross through that. Don't have to do Part 4 whatsoever. And we've done it. We made it through all of this stuff. I'm going to get to going on the forms here, because I want to try to get you out a couple minutes early and or to answer specific questions you have. Text them, shoot them in. That's it. We made it through the forms. If you haven't gotten up and left, if you're not drinking yet, good for you. We did it. So if you know this stuff and walk away right now, my hope is you're most of the way there.